Why Poland is backing laws that make it tough for Jews to reclaim stolen property. Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid called the legislation a disgrace, while the country's embassy in Poland issued a statement on Twitter saying it would make it impossible for seized property to be returned and make it harder for families to seek compensation. On June 24, Poland's lower house of parliament passed a draft legislation that would change the rules for property restitution in the country. But this move has come under criticism both domestically and internationally, with critics saying it would make it harder for Jews to recover property seized by Poland's Nazi occupiers during the Second World War. For at least the past year, Poland has been defending its plan, which came to a head last week with the passing of the draft legislation. Reuters reported that the legislation would implement a 2015 constitutional tribunal ruling that there should be a deadline after which faulty administrative decisions can no longer be challenged. The law sets this deadline at 30 years. How does this legislation affect Jewish families? Occupied Poland's Jewish community was almost entirely wiped out by Nazi Germany during World War II, and their property looted, stolen, and nationalized by the post war communist government. Jewish property owners and their descendants, as well as Jewish organizations, have been campaigning for decades for compensation and for the return of the stolen property. Some researchers trace the start of restitution claims to 1989 after the fall of communism, but others argue that it started much earlier after the end of the war. In his paper titled Jewish Property After 1945, Cultures and Economics of Ownership, Loss, Recovery and Transfer, Jacob R. Lebedge writes that the discourse on the subject of repartitions began as early as 1945. In his writings, World War II historian David Gerich mentions that most of the property lost by the Jews was never recovered, and he delves into what stolen property meant to Jews and how it shaped their memories about the past, particularly how newcomers and non Jewish owners of these objects view them differently than survivors of the Holocaust. While many Poles have been accused of complicity, thousands of others also risked their lives to protect Jewish neighbors during the war years. Why is this debate important? Prior to the war, Poland was home to one of the largest Jewish communities in the world. Last year, on the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, Poland became the only European country to not have legislated on property restitution. Back then, major Jewish organizations had brought attention to how the lack of legislation was impacting survivors and descendants of victims. Geordie Taylor, director of operations of the World Jewish Restitution Organization, had told news publication that the country's economy continues to benefit from the nationalization of property of Jewish owners by the communist government in the post-war years in Poland. In his writings, World War II, historian David Gerlach mentions that most of the property lost by the Jews was never recovered, and he delves into what stolen property meant to Jews. Why is the debate important? Prior to the war, Poland was home to the largest Jewish communities in the world. Last year, the 75th anniversary of the liberation of OS, Poland became the only European country to have legislated on property restitution. The judge ordered the historians to issue a public apology. Grabowski had later given interviews summarizing the court judgment, where the two historians were convicted of ascribing to Poles the crimes of the Holocaust committed by the Third Reich can be construed as hurtful and striking at the feeling of identity and national pride. While the authors are appealing the verdict, Holocaust historians believe that this law and this ruling will make it difficult to conduct research on crimes that occurred on Polish soil during World War II. In 2018, following criticism by the US and Israel, the Polish government was forced remove parts of this Holocaust law that imposed jail terms on people who suggested the nation was complicit in Nazi crimes. What is the latest development? Israel's foreign minister Yair Lapid called the legislation a disgrace, while the country's embassy in Poland issued a statement on Twitter saying it would make it impossible for seized property to be returned and make it harder for families to seek compensation. The US joined Israel in criticizing Poland's move. The decision of Poland's parliament yesterday was a step in the wrong direction. We urge Poland not to move the legislation forward, a US State Department spokesman Ned Prince said on Twitter. Thank you.